today on part 11 of our Grand Cherokee project series. We tackle a project that we've been wanting to get done for a while now. Install a battery isolator, add a second battery, and build a completely custom battery and accessory box in the back of the Jeep to hold everything. Back in 2014, I purchased my first Jeep ever, which is this, a 1994 Jeep Grand Cherokee Laredo. With the big 5.2 liter V8 engine and low miles, this completely stock ZJ was full of potential. Since then, well, we've done a few upgrades and modification. Past projects include a 3.5-inch lift, transfer case swap, custom roof rack, lights, skid plates, and so much more. We've transformed this stock ZJ into a capable off-road rig and reliable daily driver that's taken us all across Arizona. Today, we continue the project. Alright, so let's get right into it. Fair warning, this project is going to be pretty detailed as everything we'll be doing today is 100% custom. So real quick, the plan for this project is really in 3 parts. The first will be up in front of the Jeep. We will need to reposition our primary battery and install a battery isolator. Secondly, we will turn to the back of the Jeep and build our custom box, which will hold the second battery, air compressor, and inverter. Finally, we'll then run the wiring from underneath the hood back to the battery box and do a test to make sure everything is working properly. In terms of things needed for this project, the most expensive part by far is the actual battery. For this, you can use any type of battery you like, but we opted for a deep cycle AGM battery to handle long and slow power draws. Some other things you will need is particle board, some metal railing and other random metal pieces, saws, a welder, and finally, tons of patience. For this project, I luckily had my dad to do all of the custom fabrication, as this kind of stuff is right up his alley. He's the one who built my custom speaker box I have in the right rear quarter panel of my Jeep, which is sort of what inspired this whole project to begin with. Our work began under the hood. Our first goal was to remove the primary battery and work out a solution to try and make some more room up front. One of the biggest drawbacks of having a 5.2 liter engine is that there flat out isn't any room to work under here. So the fact that we even had to try and fit a small-ish isolator up here was going to require moving some things around. There is absolutely no way that we would be able to fit a second battery up here without heavy modification. After the main battery was out, we spotted our culprit. The battery tray that comes from the factory is big and bulky, and ours was actually already broken and only mounted down in 2 spots. Also, the battery sits a few inches closer to the engine than what is necessary. Our plan was to create a new tray that would tuck the battery closer to the fender and down a couple of inches as well. While not a drastic difference, it would buy us a few inches of much needed free space to work with. We got to work cutting metal railing and beginning the construction of the new battery tray. The tray quickly took shape as we cornered off the metal and began making it all fit around our battery. The tray was small enough to save some space overall, but not too small to where it couldn't hold a new style of battery in the future. After a bit of welding, the base of the tray was really starting to take shape. We test fitted the battery, which seemed to be working good so far. We then moved back to the Jeep to do some checking. We placed the new tray in, and the next step was to then figure out how we were going to secure it. The body already had a small shelf and hole that we would be utilizing for this step. To make it fit where we wanted, a bit of body modification and hammering was needed in a spot or two to make sure we had the right clearance. For the rest of the supports, we would be using some thin 3/16 sheet metal to form legs or supports to fill in the rest of the gaps underneath the tray. This, of course, took a bit of cutting, grinding, and some more hammering. After getting these built, we test fitted them and began the process of welding them in place. Each tab would have to be custom fit to the right height and angle. We worked into the night before coming back the next morning to continue on. The next day we picked up where we left off. A quick comparison of the old battery tray with our newly fabricated one shows just how much space we were able to save. With the structure of the battery tray now mostly done, we moved on to the next part, adding a wall to the engine side of the tray. This would be used to keep the battery contained on one side and also provide a mounting surface on the other for our isolator and additional wires. This would help keep things looking clean and easy to maintain in the future as well. We cut this to the right size, drilled some holes for mounting, and then set to work on creating anchor points for the battery. This was also, of course, made out of scrap metal. We welded on the anchor tabs, which would be used to strap the battery firmly in place once everything was mounted. And here you can see the final product, which started as nothing and was slowly built and customized to our exact needs. After a quick coat of paint, we used some insulating rubber to coat the bottom of the tray and face of the newly installed compartment. This would allow things to sit firmly and hopefully prevent any unnecessary vibrations or rattles. After this was on good, we bolted our battery isolator to the outside of the compartment on our tray. We would be using a Cole-Hersey 90 amp isolator. It's a relatively simple unit, but should be plenty to get the job done. A lot of battery isolators can run into the hundreds of dollars, and we really didn't see the need for anything really fancy. The main thing about the isolator is that it charges both the primary and the secondary battery at the same time, but allows you to use and theoretically drain the secondary battery without killing your main battery. After this was done, we gave everything one more test fit outside of the vehicle. Everything was looking real good. We then put the tray into the engine bay. The fitment was tight, but allowed us enough room to run wiring to the isolator and anchor the battery down. Once everything was bolted down firmly, it was clear that this tray wasn't going to budge. Everything was solid. With the battery back in place, it was time to wire the isolator into our electrical system. To do this, we ran a thicker gauge power wire from the alternator to the isolator, and then from the isolator to the main battery. We ended up needing to rewire the posts, but that wasn't a big deal. We also installed a thicker and better ground wire to accommodate the increased power running through the system. After accidentally cutting the wrong wire, which set us back several minutes figuring out what happened, we eventually got everything wired in and running. A quick test showed that our main battery was charging at just over 14 volts, just like intended. And nothing was on fire. The next phase of the project involved moving to the back of the Jeep. It was now time to start on the actual unit that would be holding our battery and other accessories in place. The battery box we were going to build was going to be in the left rear quarter panel where the spare tire used to sit. This would oppose my speaker box on the right side and still allow plenty of room for gear in the middle between the two. We began measuring and mocking up what the box would look like. We started by cutting just one piece of particle board that would form the tall outermost wall. Building the box would be a tedious and time-consuming process that involved lots of sanding and test fitting. We used cardboard to mock up the next piece before cutting. After the piece was roughly the right shape, we glued it down and then nailed it to the main piece. We would let that piece set overnight before coming back tomorrow and doing some sanding, then cutting the next piece and repeating the whole process again and again until the box was complete. Over the next week, we chipped away at this process and slowly pieced together the box. Each night was spent doing some cutting, then some gluing, then sanding and filing to ensure the box fit each nook and cranny just right. It was a time-consuming process, but the end effort would eventually pay off. We had to deal with the curves of the wheel well and quarter panel in our design. Eventually, all the pieces were cut and our box was looking quite good. The next step was to put on the finishing touches. End caps were put on the shelves of the box, and the edges were sanded so that they fit snug to the vehicle. We also trimmed the spare tire holder to get our clearance just right. We gave everything a test fit and we're feeling pretty good. The battery would be going in the upper left corner, along with all of the wiring and distribution blocks. An inverter and an area to place things while charging would be on the upper right shelf. The compressor and all of its hoses would sit on the lower right, where the lower left area would be used to store more recovery gear or anything else that was loose. After the box was solid, it was time to work on the mounting hardware. Again, we made this custom out of some scrap metal and bolted it to the inside of the box. We gave things a real good sand before the final black carpet was precariously applied. We hardwired in the air compressor, and things were really starting to look finished at this point. We placed the box into position in the back of the Jeep. With the battery box now in place, it was time to anchor it down. The box is secured using several bolts into the body, including one that goes through our negative power bar and into the wheel well. After a few bolts, the battery box was mounted firmly and not going anywhere, no matter what we threw the Jeep at. With the box installed, we turned to mounting all of the accessories and getting the wiring polished up. We made custom mounts that anchored to the box that would hold our battery in place in the rear. Custom power distribution blocks were also run, and we began to wire in the air compressor, inverter, and related ground wires. When all of this was finally done, the box was now complete, and the only step left was to run positive wiring from the isolator up in the front and install a couple of fuses. To run the wiring, we started underneath the hood at the isolator. We would be running the same 0 gauge power wire that we used to connect the alternator and the isolator before. We began with a fuse up front. While we did already have a fuse block installed on the other side of the engine bay, this fuse would be dedicated to the line between the isolator and second battery. Running this thick of a wire throughout the whole vehicle, of course, wasn't going to be easy. After the fuse, we took the wire through the fender well and through a hole in the door jamb. From here, we would go back inside the cabin and along the floor towards the back. This of course meant removing nearly every plastic trim piece. And it seems like no matter how careful we are, we always manage to break some part of the brittle plastic each time. Making the wire fit forced us to get creative and downright desperate in a few spots. We had already run speaker wire along this same channel, so space was already extremely hard to come by. Eventually, we made it to the rear seats. We would be crossing underneath the seats to our battery box from this point. This is also where we have the amps mounted for the speaker box, so this is sort of an important electrical crossover point in the Jeep. This part luckily went smoothly and quickly, and our power wire soon arrived at the battery box. We mounted the wire to the positive post and secured it to the box. One more fuse was installed between the power wire and the distribution block as a final protection method. A quick test with the voltmeter showed that our battery and distribution block sat at around 11 volts when the Jeep was off and was charging at around 14.4 when the Jeep was running. It looked like everything was working perfectly. And that's about it for this project. While time consuming, the battery box and everything else had turned out to be just like we had envisioned. The battery box tucks into the quarter panel and stays mostly out of the way. The battery is mounted firmly and is easy to change out in the future. The inverter is secured and will allow us to charge things while camped for the night or while on the move. And of course, having the compressor hardwired in and ready to use at a moment's notice is extremely convenient. While I did need to buy another air hose to be able to extend the reach of the compressor and be able to air up all the wheels, all of these components fit perfectly in the compressor cubby. While this project may not be a 100% necessity, it is nice to have another battery, and it is going to make life a lot more convenient while keeping things clean and organized in the back of the Jeep. The best part of this project was that it was as custom as it gets. There isn't another one of these out there. This probably can't even be duplicated exactly. It's just pretty cool. We turned wood, metal scraps, and other components into something incredibly functional. And we had fun doing it. That wraps up this project. In the coming months, I will be putting the battery box and power systems through the paces as we take it out on some upcoming trips. Be sure to catch up on our ZJ project series here on YouTube and visit our website for more details on each phase of the project. Until the next ZJ modification video, I do appreciate you watching this one.